Now, an investigation by this programme has found council leaseholders in Lambeth are facing bills of up to £100,000 for building work on former council flats. They say the huge costs are higher than the market rate or due to long-term neglect by the council. Richard Tudor reports.
We have new roof above here. You can see
Jamie is awaiting a £97,000 bill from Lambeth Council for refurbishment on his ex-council flat. He says the block has seen years of neglect.
The roof hasn't been repaired, Lambeth say, at all since the building was built in 1850. The fact that they are doing it now after such a long time period, can only prove that the building has been neglected. The state of it obviously isn't in a good enough state right now that they could have not done these works. The place has been falling to bits. Well, there have definitely been times when I've felt like taking my own life, which I don't say lightly at all. I'm on antidepressants as we speak. It's affected everything. It's affected every day. I'm thinking about it, thinking, what can I do? So obviously there's been a knock-on effect with family and friends, relationships. It affects absolutely everything. I've never been in debt in my life before, and it's just such a huge figure.
Catherine and Pippa bought their flat in Camberwell 5 years ago and received notice of major works in 2019. They were asked to pay £73,000.
It was without any preamble, just a letter in the post with a £73,000 prospective bill at the end of it, which was obviously incredibly alarming, stressful. You're presented with this sort of ruinous sum of money that you're going to be liable for, with no measure of support, explanation, or really much by way of description of what's going to happen.
When we got the independent surveyor to come and do a general conditions report and report on what the likely costs associated with the recommended works would be, the total came to just over 130,000, which would be about £11,000 to £12,000 per flat maximum.
We've spoken to several leaseholders who didn't want to be on camera but who have faced an array of problems. One was charged twice the market rate, including for doors that the Housing Ombudsman found didn't actually exist. In a letter, the Ombudsman found Lambeth had made several serious failings. So why do council leaseholders find themselves facing such huge bills?
Once they've signed a long-term maintenance contract for their housing stock, the cost control goes out the window. So this is where leaseholders fit in, or are the victims, because there are huge bills floating around, which the council can absorb for the larger blocks, but individual leaseholders who have to pay their share find these sort of devastating bills crossing the threshold.
The government legislated to tackle high major works charges for local authority leaseholders in 2014, after a 92-year-old woman died of a heart attack following a £50,000 bill. That law, so-called Florey's Law named after her, caps major works charges in London at £15,000. But because of a number of caveats, that doesn't actually apply to many leaseholders in the capital.
It only applies in cases where central government funding is available for refurbishment of housing stock, and that hasn't been the case for many years. So I'm not aware of a single example where Florey's Law has helped a leaseholder. Not aware of one, either in London or outside it.
We invited Lambeth Council to participate in this film, but they declined. However, a spokesperson told us,
all housing maintenance works in the borough are carried at fixed rates and in line with a tight legal framework covering tendering, tender review and transparency. The council is always ready and willing to address issues where residents feel their property may have been neglected.
A spokesperson for Mears said,
Mears are contracted by Lambeth Council to undertake repairs and maintenance. We agree costs in advance with all of our partners using the normal pricing mechanisms.
These bills can and have been challenged before at tribunals, but that can't happen until the work is completed and the final bill handed over. So for now, Catherine, Pippa and Jamie are left to wait.
Well, we did ask Lambeth Council to appear on the programme. Sadly, they declined. Belle, let me ask you, you're an MP for a constituency in Lambeth and you've got first-hand experience of this, haven't you?
Yes, I do, and obviously the major works bills are crushing. And as you heard, you know, people people really, really do struggle with them. They are such large amounts of money, and you know, I believe Lambeth Council do try where they can, but it's Mears. I noticed that you asked Mears for a comment as well. Mears are an absolutely disgraceful company. I would hope to see them moved as contractors for Lambeth, because their work is not good enough. Quite simply, they charge too much, and they are directly failing residents right across the constituency. And another major problem is this lack of central government funding. We know that through the past decade of austerity, our councils' funding have been cut right down to the bone. We know that also councils that are Labour as opposed to Conservative councils have received more cuts on average than these Conservative councils, and so are struggling in a very, very different way.
Yeah.
But I do believe better legislation needs to be put in place to protect leaseholders. Now, the government have put forward some legislation recently, as announced in the Queen's speech, or will be putting forward legislation, but it's not going to be good enough. It doesn't protect leaseholders from the past. It's looking towards the future, and even those in the future, it doesn't do enough to protect us from this feeling that, you know, you own a home but you don't quite own it.
Just to make the point that Mears obviously aren't here to defend themselves. Andrew, in the film we heard Jamie talk very graphically about how this has affected his life and his mental health. He's being charged nearly £100,000. It's a staggering amount for repair work on a roof that hasn't been fixed for more than a century. Has Lambeth actually failed to maintain the housing stock that it has here?
Whilst I'm full of admiration for Bell's defence of Lambeth Council, the fact is that that's not the opinion of their leaseholders. And they've been particularly...
I am a leaseholder of Lambeth Council.
Yeah, and they've been
particularly... I can give you...
Yeah, there's more than you, though, isn't there?
No, there's more than me, and many of my constituents write to me, and I'm very, very clear about the fact that more needs to be done for them. I wasn't saying that nothing is wrong. I was being very clear about the fact that there are serious issues when it comes to funding, and those issues come from central government.
Well, no, they don't come from central government.
Yes,
Lambeth Council is in charge, and Lambeth Council have chosen not to notify their leaseholders well in advance of there being these enormous bills. It's Lambeth Council that is issuing these bills, and it's Lambeth Council that takes its leaseholders to court when they can't afford to pay these ridiculous amounts of money. And they've got to attend to it. Too many councils treat leaseholders like cash cows. There needs to be a reform, absolutely. We need to move forward to a different mode. I mean, for the future, this doesn't help Jamie, but for the future, we need to move to a different form of ownership in London, something like common hold, which doesn't seem to be popular at the moment, but we need to push it forward. And we've got to recognise that leasehold is not the sunny uplands that was sold in the estate agent's documents. It's very difficult. I too am a leaseholder, so we're all in the same.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
You know, and it is not. Residents need to be protected. Leaseholders need to be protected against these usurious amounts of money that are being taken from them day in and day out.
So, Andrew, what needs to change?
Well, we need to change. First of all, we need to turn common hold from being a nice concept into something that's actual reality. The Mayor of London needs to do more on the homes that he's backing to ensure that those leaseholders of the future will not receive these ridiculous bills. We need to, the government seriously needs to look at extending Flores law, because it's not fit for purpose. It's only being applied in a very small minority of situations. And we need that action pretty much now. And the cladding crisis now has to concentrate the mind of the government on attending to this, because there are too many people who feel like that promise of home ownership has turned into a curse that they wish they'd never embarked upon.
Andrew, you say all these things needs to happen now. Do you actually see any genuine impetus from the government to do these things?
Well, yes, I do. I think the government's moved certainly on cladding with regard to this. They've identified that money is available there. Not enough, may I say. It doesn't extend to on the cladding side, doesn't extend to buildings under 18 metres. That needs to be completed. They need to ensure that those people are covered as well. But while they're at it, they can look at the form of ownership that is producing these enormous bills.
Belle?
Yeah, I mean, they're leaseholders are being absolutely failed in terms of cladding. And we have to remember it was government legislation, well, it was the legislation that was voted down after the Locarno House fire in Camberwell some years before. That created a situation where this type of cladding was allowed to be put on a building like Grenfell. And, you know, since then in East London, more recently, we've seen, you know, the dangers of it, you know, people's homes going up in flames.
Belle, isn't the very idea
repeatedly
of a leasehold just now completely outdated?
In my view, it is. I mean, it does feel like a trap. And my argument would be that when we do look at leasehold legislation moving forward, yes, it's absolutely right that we look at the leaseholders of the future, but could we please look at the people that are leaseholders right now, people that are suffering right now because of this form of ownership, which doesn't really feel like ownership, because now you're stuck in a situation where actually, you know, thinking of those who have these cladding issues, they're not only living in an unsafe situation where they're having to pay thousands of pounds, but they cannot even sell their properties on.
Belle, thank you.